This continues readings from Genesis in the Jerusalem Bible. This is chapter 39 of Genesis, Joseph's early days in Egypt. Now, Joseph had been taken down into Egypt. Potiphar, the Egyptian, one of Pharaoh's officials and commander of the guard, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. Yahweh was with Joseph, and everything went well with him. He lodged in the house of his Egyptian master, and when his master saw how Yahweh was with him and how Yahweh made everything succeed that he turned his hand to, he was pleased with Joseph and made him his personal attendant. And his master put him in charge of his household, entrusting everything to him. And from the time he put him in charge of his household and all his possessions, Yahweh blessed the Egyptian's household out of consideration for Joseph. Yahweh's blessing extended to all his possessions, both household and estate. So he left Joseph to handle all his possessions, and with him at hand, concerned himself with nothing beyond the food he ate. The attempt to seduce Joseph. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and it happened some time later that his master's wife looked desirously at him and said, "Sleep with me." But he refused and answered his master's wife, "Because of me, my master does not concern himself with what happens in the house. He has handed over all his possessions to me. He is no more master in this house than I am. He has withheld nothing from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How could I do anything so wicked and sin against God?" Although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not agree to sleep with her and surrender to her. But one day Joseph, in the course of his duties, came to the house, and there was not a servant there indoors. The woman caught hold of him by his tunic and said, "Sleep with me." But he left the tunic in her hand and ran out of the house. Seeing he had left the tunic in her hand and left the house, she called her servants and said to them, "Look at this. He has brought us a Hebrew to insult us. He came to sleep with me, but I screamed. And when he heard me scream and shout, he left his tunic beside me and ran out of the house." She put the tunic down by her side until the master came home. Then she told him the same tale. "The Hebrew slave you bought came to insult me. But when I screamed and called out, he left his garment by my side and made his escape." When the master heard his wife say, "This is how your slave treated me," he was furious. Joseph's master had him arrested and committed to the jail where the king's prisoners were kept. Joseph in jail. And there in jail he stayed. But Yahweh was with Joseph. He was kind to him and made him popular with the chief jailer. The chief jailer put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners in the jail, making him responsible for everything done there. The chief jailer did not need to interfere with Joseph's administration, for Yahweh was with him, and Yahweh made everything he undertook successful. Chapter 40. Joseph interprets the dream of Pharaoh's officials. It happened some time later that the king of Egypt's cupbearer and his baker offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them under arrest in the house of the commander of the guard, in the jail, where Joseph was a prisoner. The commander of the guard assigned Joseph to them to attend to their wants, and they remained under arrest for some time. Now both of them had dreams on the same night, each with its own meaning for the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were prisoners in the jail. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they looked gloomy, and he asked the two officials who were with him under arrest in his master's house, "Why these black looks today?" They answered him, "We've had a dream. There's no one to interpret it." "Are not interpretations God's business?" Joseph asked them. "Come, tell me." So the chief cupbearer described his dream to Joseph, telling him, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me. On the vine were 3 branches. No sooner had it budded than it blossomed, and its clusters became ripe grapes. I had Pharaoh's cup in my hand. I picked the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup and put the cup into Pharaoh's hand." "Here is the interpretation of it," Joseph told him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. In another 3 days, Pharaoh will release you and restore you to your place. Then you will hand Pharaoh his cup as you did before when you were his cupbearer. But be sure to remember me when things go well with you, and do me the kindness of reminding Pharaoh about me to get me out of this house. I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews in the first place, and even here I have done nothing to warrant imprisonment." The chief baker, seeing that the interpretation had been favorable, said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. There were 3 trays of cakes on my head. In the top tray were all kinds of Pharaoh's favorite cakes, but the birds ate them off the tray on my head." Joseph gave him this answer, "Here is the interpretation of it. The 3 trays are 3 days. In another 3 days, Pharaoh will release you and hang you on a gallows, and the birds will eat the flesh off your bones." And so it happened. The 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a banquet for all his officials. And he released the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. The cupbearer was restored to his position as cupbearer to hand Pharaoh his cup. The chief baker he hanged. It was as Joseph had said in his interpretation. But the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Chapter 41, Pharaoh's Dreams. 2 years later it happened that Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, and there, coming up from the Nile, were 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they began to feed among the rushes. And 7 other cows, ugly and lean, came up the Nile after them, and these went over and stood beside the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and lean cows ate the fat and sleek cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time. There, growing on one stalk, were 7 ears of corn, full and ripe. And sprouting up after them came 7 ears of corn, meager and scorched by the east wind. The scanty ears of corn swallowed the 7 full and ripe ears of corn. Then Pharaoh awoke. It was a dream. In the morning, Pharaoh, feeling disturbed, had all the magicians and wise men of Egypt summoned to him. Pharaoh told them his dream, but no one could interpret it for Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer addressed Pharaoh, "Today I must recall my offense. Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put myself and the chief baker under arrest in the house of the commander of the guard. We had a dream on the same night, he and I, and each man's dream had a meaning for himself. There was a young Hebrew with us, one of the slaves belonging to the commander of the guard. We told our dreams to him, and he interpreted them, giving each of us the interpretation of his dream. It turned out just as he interpreted for us. I was restored to my place, but the other man was hanged." Then Pharaoh had Joseph summoned, and they hurried him from prison. He shaved and changed his clothes and came into Pharaoh's presence. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I have had a dream which no one can interpret, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph answered Pharaoh, "I do not count. It is God who will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So Pharaoh told Joseph, "In my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and there were 7 cows, fat and sleek, coming out of the Nile, and they began to feed among the rushes. And 7 other cows came up after them, starved, ugly, and lean. I have never seen such poor cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean and ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows. But when they had eaten them up, it was impossible to tell that they had eaten them, for they remained as lean as before. And I woke up. And then again in my dream, there, growing on one stalk, were 7 ears of corn, beautifully ripe. But sprouting up after them came 7 ears of corn, withered, meager, and scorched by the east wind. The shriveled ears of corn swallowed the 7 ripe ears of corn. I told the magicians this, but no one could tell me the meaning." Joseph told Pharaoh, "Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is going to do. The 7 fine cows are 7 years, and the 7 ripe ears of corn are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 gaunt and lean cows coming up after them are 7 years, as are the 7 shriveled ears of corn scorched by the east wind. There will be 7 years of famine. It is, as I have told Pharaoh. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is going to do. 7 years are coming, bringing great plenty to the whole land of Egypt. But 7 years of famine will follow them, when all the plenty in the land of Egypt will be forgotten, and famine will exhaust the land. The famine that is to follow will be so very severe that no one will remember what plenty the country enjoyed." The reason why the dream came to Pharaoh twice is because the event is already determined by God, and God is impatient to bring it about. Pharaoh should not choose a man who is intelligent and wise to govern the land of Egypt. Pharaoh should take action and appoint supervisors over the land, and impose a tax of 1/5 on the land of Egypt during the 7 years of plenty. They will collect all food produced during these good years that are coming. They will store the corn in Pharaoh's name and place the food in the towns and hold it there. This food will serve as a reserve for the land during the 7 years of famine that will afflict the land of Egypt. And so the land will not be destroyed by the famine. I need to correct a line. The line that I said was, Pharaoh should not choose a man who is intelligent and wise to govern the land of Egypt, should rather be, Pharaoh should now choose a man who is intelligent and wise to govern the land of Egypt. The book had a smudged ink.